Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is the Institute Saga in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 16, Preparations. Thanos stared at the box that had appeared before him, a box tagged with an insignia that he recognized only too well. Apocalypse. He mused to himself, carefully examining the box without touching it. After a long moment, he reached out and tapped the insignia, then leaned back in his chair as a holographic figure formed. Greetings, Thanos of the Titans. The image of Apocalypse said. As you have no doubt deduced, I have returned from my eons of slumber and am in need of some amusement. Thanos snorted. In this box is a certain item that I once used. I am curious to see what you, my greatest ally and greatest enemy, would do with it, so consider it a gift, but remember that as I was once its master, it will not work against me. Enjoy. The figure dissipated and Thanos leaned forwards as the box cracked open. Lifting the lid, his breath caught as he beheld its contents. The Infinity Gauntlet. He gloated, pulling it out and donning it. Looking at the empty gem mounts on it, he nodded firmly. Gather my forces, for it is time for me to claim what is mine from Asgard. Around the raised platform on which his throne was placed, an army began to move. Galatea. Galatea growled under her breath as she turned to face the man who held her life in his hands. Yes, sir. Magneto raised one eyebrow slightly at her tone, but decided to let it slide. We will soon be on the move. You will help Chrome as he directs, he speaks with my voice. Galatea gave a jerky nod, then backed away as Magneto raised his hand in warning. You are my weapon, Galatea, nothing more. He stated, glaring at her. Remember your place. Magneto strode out of the barren room, his cloak flaring, and Galatea growled again before hissing in pain as a spike of agony lanced through her. Giving the open door a hate-filled glare, she retrieved her cape from the wall hook and strode out of the room that she considered her cell. Kara. Hey, Jean. Supergirl called in greeting as she landed on the lawn. Have I got a story to tell you? We have a real-life werewolf living in Stark Tower. No way. Jean gasped. A werewolf? Yep, changes by the light of the full moon and everything. Kara replied as she and Jean headed into the mansion. Turns out that he was a friend of little Harry's birth parents. Thank goodness for the fact we have our own danger room, it gives him somewhere he can change safely. Wow. Jean breathed. A real-life werewolf, is he one of the Avengers? Kara shook her head. Support only, like Pepper. He can't control himself in wolf form and the transformation itself is, rather painful. You can hear bones breaking and everything. Jean winced, then frowned. So how did you find a werewolf? Oh, he found us. Kara laughed. He was friends with little Harry's birth parents and was searching for him. When he found out where Harry was, he snuck into the tower. Jarvis sounded the alarm, and while the others headed for Harry's room, I flew outside to stop him escaping that way. I got there just in time to see him being blasted by one of Thor's thunderbolts. Jean winced again. Fortunately, he knows how to help whenever Harry does something odd, like his couch into ducks trick. Kara continued. Tony invited him to stay in exchange for more info on Harry's parents. He's full of stories. Tony also has him helping with expanding his knowledge of magic. Apparently there's a whole community of magic users. Really? Jean asked in shock. Wow. Yep, Tony thinks that if he can get his tech magic proof, then there'll be a whole new market for his stuff. Kara laughed. Quill. Magneto. The mutant replied, looking round at the penthouse. Nice place. Just a little hideout I picked up several years ago. Magneto shrugged. May I offer you a drink? Tea, coffee, beer. Beer, please. Quill said, then he blinked as Magneto floated a bottle across to him. As he grabbed the bottle from midair, the cap suddenly folded upwards and floated back. Cool trick. Quill said, saluting Magneto with the glass bottle before taking a sip. Nice. Thank you. Magneto said, taking a sip of tea. How are your forces progressing? More than we expected. Quill admitted. Last count, almost 1,000 of us. Getting hard to do more than get names and basic power types. They're getting antsy. We will be moving soon. Magneto replied, staring out of the panoramic window. Do you think you can hold them for another couple of days? Yeah, but if we need to wait a week or more, we'll start shedding recruits. Quill commented as he joined Magneto at the window. I believe that Thursday will be best. Thursday evening after the rush hour. Magneto mused. I will need to lead the first group because of my powers, but we will need the second group to join us as first as possible. I can see that. Quill, Magneto said, turning slightly to fix the younger mutant with his gaze, this is not meant as an insult or a slur upon your honor, but I feel it would be better if Arclight stood beside me in the first wave and you led the second. No, please hear me out. Quill blinked, then nodded for Magneto to continue. Arclight is one of the better distance attack mutants I have encountered. Magneto explained. Her area effect attack will aid us in breaking through the outer defenses, opening the way for our forces. Your skills are more in hand-to-hand, skills which will come into their own once the defenses are breached and suppressed. Quill nodded slowly. I think I follow. There are also your leadership skills. Magneto added. The actual timing will be uncertain, and so we will need someone who can keep our forces together and ready to act at a moment's notice, if not less. All right, you convinced me. Quill sighed. I'll lead the second wave. Thank you. Magneto said. I know that you wish to be on the front lines from the moment we begin, but sometimes reality forces us to take other roles. Thanos smirked as he looked down upon the kneeling form of Malekith. Rise, my newest general, and serve me. He rumbled. The dark elf rose with incredible smoothness, belying the injuries he had taken trying to fight Thanos, as did his lieutenant. What is your command, Lord Thanos? Malekith asked, his smooth tone almost hiding the hatred within, and Thanos' grin widened. Excellent, you have great hatred within you. Your people shall come with me, to the world of Tartarus, where your race shall rise once again to wreak destruction across the face of creation like never before. Malekith's face briefly reflected his inner desire for destruction, then he bowed deeply. It shall be as you command, Lord Thanos. Thanos stepped back as around them, the fleet of blade-like starships slowly activated, rising into the sky until the light from the sun was almost eclipsed. The vertical ships hung like giant midnight black blades before ascending further, through the portal in the skies, and Thanos laughed in dark glee as the gem on his gauntlet flashed. Then he rose into the air and accelerated through the portal, away from the desolate planet. Director Fury. General Stryker. The two men briefly shook hands, then Fury motioned for Stryker to take a seat even as he returned to his desk. You said that you had important news for S.H.I.E.L.D., General. I do. Stryker said as he seated himself. Some of my sources have relayed rumors to me that there's going to be an attack on Angel Island. The cure. Fury nodded. I have received a few reports on that as well. The leader is apparently Quill of the Omegas, although one report indicated that someone else is behind him. Quill. I think I've come across that name before. Stryker mused before refocusing. Anyway, I've read that Worthington Industries only has a small security force there, a dozen or so. Against a mob of mutants, they'll just be targets. Agreed. I intend to move a small rapid reaction force to nearby, equipped with non-lethal weaponry. Stryker said. In order to make it worthwhile, I'll need to use some of this cure in weaponized form. Fury frowned. I'd like to have an agent of mine included in this. Of course. Stryker said, and Fury nodded. He'll be with you tomorrow. Anything else? As long as he brings some dart guns or whatever you have come up with, I think that it's all. Here's the file for my group. Fury accepted the file and Stryker rose. Director. General. As Fury opened the file, Stryker walked out of the office, not even glancing back as Yuriko left her position beside the door and fell into position half a step behind him. Striding down the corridors of the helicarrier, he stepped out onto the flight deck and the helicopter awaiting him. Climbing in, he pulled out his phone as Yuriko took her position and the helicopter lifted off the pad. Trask. The word is given. Putting the phone away, He smirked. Today sees the start of the end of mutants. Yuriko remained silent and Stryker's smirk grew wider. Fury closed the folder, then frowned as Thor burst into the room. Fury. Odin hath need of thine Kryptonian. What? The Med-Titan Thanos hath struck at Asgard with at the head of an army of Chitauri and Dark Elves and seized the Tesseract. He doth seek to claim the full power of the Infinity Gauntlet. Fury stared at him. What? We need help. Steve said, and Fury mentally winced at his inattention. He hadn't seen Steve enter. Clark's already agreed to join us as have the West Coast Avengers, the Fantastic Five and Excalibur. Lorzed is waiting in Asgard. Kara's coming, but we really could use CIRL's aid as well. The Henshin Rangers are sending a few of their number as well. All right. Fury nodded. However, I'm sending along another agent, one who often deploys alongside CIRL. Samuel Wilson. The Falcon? Steve asked curiously. I think I've met him before. Clark upgraded his wingsuit, didn't he? He did. He'll go with you. Fury stated. I'll send them via the Hall of Doors once they return from their current mission. Steve nodded, then paused as Fury frowned. Cap, unless I am severely mistaken, the West Coast Avengers don't have a Kryptonian, so why would they have Squirrel Girl? Ah. Fury said, his face suddenly blank. Yes, I see. Squirrel Girl. What? The Avengers have left within the last hour for Asgard, both the main Avengers and the West Coast. Superman has gone as well, in addition to another Kryptonian. Interesting. Magneto mused as he looked at the phone which sat on his desk. Any idea why? None. The electronically distorted voice said, and the other mutants around the desk exchanged glances. Rumor indicates an extinction-level threat which has the Asgardians concerned, but I have yet to acquire any actual details, other than that they expect to be gone for at least a week. Understood. Magneto said. Your usual payment will be forwarded to your account. I will contact you when I have more news. The voice said. Whisperer out. The phone clicked as the line went dead and Magneto looked up at his acolytes and guests. Well, this is unexpected, but highly fortuitous. He finally said. The Avengers would have proven to have been quite an obstacle to our plans. I for one am glad that they will no longer be a factor. A susurration of agreement echoed round the room and Magneto smirked. It would seem that there is no reason to delay further. I believe that we should move the assault up a day, unless anyone can think of a reason why we should not. The recruits are champing at the bit. Quill noted. The sooner we get them moving, the better. Will it be a problem for you? Magneto asked. I know that I am asking a great deal of you. Not a problem. Quill interrupted. I set up a way to regularly talk to the sub-leaders, they'll do the heavy lifting for me. All we need is the time we should be ready for. I think about 7 in the evening for the first wave. Magneto mused. Have some of the flight-capable mutants dress up as maintenance workers and close off the area 10 minutes beforehand. That should reduce the number of civilians getting in the way. Quill nodded. I have 8 flyers who can do that, but why flyers? So that they can rejoin us once we begin. Magneto supplied. The Kleinstock triplets will help cover the north end. Quill nodded slowly. It's going to be impressive. Wish I could be in a position to see it. Just have a television set to the news. Magneto replied. I feel certain that it will be unmissable. Quill blinked, then started to chuckle. Oh, I'm sure it will be. Anything else? I believe that we have covered everything. Magneto said, glancing round at the others. Anyone else have anything they think needs to be addressed? Several shaking heads provided his answer and he rose from his chair, extending his hand to Quill. Then the next time we meet, it will be at the site of our victory. For the future. Quill stated, shaking Magneto's hand. For mutant kind. Chapter 17, Bridge. It had not been a good day for Sharon Rice Weber. After dealing with several irritating distant relatives, who weren't distant enough in her opinion, and sorting out a bequest left to her, she had had a long day. Having her car break down halfway across the Golden Gate Bridge was just the icing on the cake, but it did put her into position to see a group of people dressed in unusual clothing start debarking from a coach that had pulled in barely 100 yards in front of her. One of the oddly dressed men walked up and paused, one hand just above the bonnet of her car. "What are you doing?" Sharon asked, leaning out of the window. "Your crankshaft's broken," the man said, earning a look. "I'm a mutant, I can detect anything technological and the engine feels like it has a broken crankshaft." Blast. Sharon swore. "I need to get back to my husband, I left him trying to write at the Water's Edge Hotel near Corinthian Island. He thinks he can make a career of it." The man pulled out a small device and tapped at it for a moment before nodding. "It looks like we can get you to Kel Bay, from there you can easily get a taxi or something." "Really?" Sharon said with a smile. "That would be great. Thanks. Well, stay put for a bit and we'll see about giving you a lift." The man smiled. "Now, if you'll pardon me." Sharon nodded, then frowned slightly as he left. The bridge seemed far quieter than normal, not a single vehicle had passed during their conversation. "Well, just a woman whose car broke down, no threat," Tekmage stated. "I told her that if she sat tight for now, we'd get her to Kel Bay." Magneto chuckled briefly at the misleading truth, then strode to stand in the exact middle of the bridge, looking round at the milling mutants. "Stay away from the edges," he warned, then he closed his eyes in concentration. "It's almost ironic, my old friend always said that we needed to build bridges. And there seems to be a massive tailback at both ends of the bridge," the reporter in the helicopter said as the cameraman carefully zoomed in on the workmen setting up the barriers. "Although we have no official word as to what is going on, there seems to be a large number of people spread across the roadways near the middle, looks like at least 300 or 400. Oh my God! My God! The towers are shifting. You can see the cables flexing and shaking. What is going on?" Sharon stared up at the support towers in front of her. The red-painted steel towers seemed to be almost flexing with slow sine waves making their ways down the supporting cables. Reaching for the door release, she slowly stepped out of her car, staring in shock at the impossible gyrations of the structure. Scott Summers stared at the image on the television screen. Although the angle was very high, the cloaked shape of Magneto was unmistakable. A moment later, the camera jerkily panned to one end of the bridge where the roadbed was cracking and splintering. "What is he doing?" Scott whispered. "I have no idea," Alex replied quietly, then a gasp caused everyone in the common room to stare at Xavier. "He is moving the bridge," Charles realized. "X-Men. Generation X. Suit up and deploy to Angel Island now. Magneto is after the cure." Sharon fell to one knee as the entire bridge lurched upwards, metal shrieking and groaning under the stresses imposed upon it. The horizon seemed to fall away as the bridge rose, water cascading away from the torn pilings while debris pockmarked the waves below. Her gaze tracked across to where a man dressed in red and purple stood with his hands extended. Somehow, she knew, he was responsible for what was happening. Whoever he was. Magneto gritted his teeth as he manipulated the magnetic fields levitating the Golden Gate Bridge. Although he had indeed lifted heavier items before, the need to actively maintain the structural integrity of the bridge during transit lent a whole new level of complexity to the process. Shifting his stance slightly, Magneto carefully analyzed the interaction of his powers and the structure of the bridge, adjusting the shape of his projected field to begin moving the bridge northeast. Soon, the threat to mutant kind would be in his grasp, along with those who had created it. "Holy shit!" the guard whispered as he stared at the image on the screen in the mess hall. "What kind of power can do that? If someone's moving the bridge and with the influx of mutants visiting, they're after Jimmy." Another guard realized. "Thank God for the new guys and their beautiful robots." "Beautiful?" the first guard echoed, half turning to stare at his colleague. "You said they were creepy when they arrived yesterday." "That was yesterday," the second guard shot back. "Come on, we need to armor up. We have an ID of the mutant lifting the bridge." The captain of the guards shouted from the doorway. "It's Magneto, so everyone arm up with the non-magnetic kit." The Blackbird erupted through the holographic projection covering the hangar bay, followed seconds later by the Javelin. Both craft turned in unison even as they arced upwards and settled on their new course, the Javelin moving ahead due to its unique propulsion system. Blackbird to Javelin. Logan growled. Slim, you got the course laid in. Course calculated and laid in, accelerating to Mach 4. Cyclops replied from the Javelin's cockpit. Suggest control link up now. Initiating link up. Logan replied as he tapped a small code into the number pad. A moment later, the display screens flickered into a new configuration as the Blackbird took position behind and slightly to the right of the Javelin, remaining perfectly in position as if connected by an invisible adamantium beam. A brief shudder ran through the plane as it penetrated the sound barrier and Logan glanced behind him. Check your stuff, we're heading there fast. He called. How fast? Ray called back and Logan glanced at the airspeed indicator. We're already going at 2,000 kilometers per hour and will soon be hitting twice that. He stated. Damn, Flyboy upgraded this plane good. It'll take under an hour to get there, hope we make it in time. Stryker watched the television image. Impressive. Magneto is classified as a high alpha bordering on low omega class mutant. Trask supplied. It is known that he levitated his asteroid base himself until the lift generators had been installed. Moving a bridge would require less effort, but a higher degree of precision. What are those specs? Stryker asked as a half-dozen dots moved towards the flying structure. As if in response to his question, the camera zoomed in on one, revealing it to be a flying human who was shedding a Flowers Kent jacket. I think we now know who ordered the workmen to close the bridge. Trask said with a wry smile, then his gaze blanked for a moment. The research outpost's security forces have begun arming themselves. Ready to relay your orders. This is General Stryker, relaying through the Sentinels. Stryker said without hesitation. Equip non-metallic kit only, mutant code-named Magneto is leading the attack. Deploy to primary line. There is a high chance of powered backup, so select targets carefully. Stryker out. Link closed. Trask said and Stryker frowned. The Sentinels, can they stand against Magneto? His power set has been analyzed and countermeasures developed. Trask reassured him. All Sentinels are equipped with a null mag field generator which will prevent him from using his abilities against them, although installing it has reduced the weapon's loadout slightly. Excellent. Stryker purred as several screens around the control dais suddenly lit up, showing the relayed images from the Dickenii leading the Sentinel forces. Excellent. Master Mold calculates that it'll take him approximately 15 more minutes to move the bridge and place it to cover the gap between Kell Bay and Angel Island, plus however long he needs to position the bridge securely. Trask relayed. It will take them at least another 5 minutes to get their forces deployed enough to begin fighting, and Master Mold's link to the air traffic systems indicates that in less than 40 minutes, mutant reinforcements will arrive to protect the outpost. Stryker glanced at him and Trask held out one hand, letting wireframe holograms of two planes form above his palm. The first plane is the Javelin, the second is tentatively identified as the craft used by the X-Men. So, as long as the troops can hold out for 20 minutes or so, we should still be able to continue producing the cure. Stryker mused. All right. Are the Sentinels ready? They have finished deploying. Trask confirmed, rising from his seat and offering a small radio. I have been given a task to achieve, this radio will let you contact me. The entire city of San Francisco appeared to have abandoned their homes and flocked to see the flying bridge with its escorting aerial mutants. Thousands of camera flashes turned the crowds into a flickering sea of light as the bridge passed almost overhead, seawater dripping from its pylons. With majestic slowness, the bridge glided through the air, the only sounds from it being the occasional shriek of stressed metal, the sounds of concrete breaking and the twanging of the supporting cables as the load they supported shifted in ways that the designers had never foreseen. Fuck. It's going to cost a fortune to replace it. The president sent a speaking glance at the advisor whose outburst had shattered the shocked silence of the Oval Office. That's not the main problem. The advisor glanced away, unwilling to meet the president's eyes. Magneto grunted with concentration as he skewed the bridge round, settling it ready to descend, then a plasma blast struck one of the towers. Shit. Dad, there are sentinels down there. Pietro shouted as he zoomed back from the leading edge of the airborne bridge. Artillery to the railings. Arclight yelled even as the first sentinel rose up to the level of the bridge on its rocket pack, guns ready to fire. Arclight smashed her hands together and a cone of energy slashed outwards, shredding the chest of the sentinel and erupting out of its back. Bereft of propulsion, the sparking wreckage fell, only to be replaced by 2 more sentinels. Magneto ignored the sudden bombardment and lowered the bridge, reshaping the bases of the towers into sharp spikes to penetrate the seabed and hold it secure. The first Sentinel squadron is engaging. Trask announced and Stryker nodded. They seem to have a very high proportion of ranged attack types. And some pure power types. Trask noted as a dark-skinned woman punched through the leg of the Sentinel that had landed on the bridge. Makes sense if this is their advance force. Ranged attacks to provide cover and power types to smash through the outer defenses as the reinforcements come up. Stryker nodded in agreement even as the status screen noted the loss of a 4th Sentinel. Can this thing go any faster? Sunspot fretted and Logan snarled at him. We're almost at Mach 6 as it is, so unless you think you can fly that fast. No, it's okay. Roberto hastily backtracked. What's the plan when we get there? We'll be flying over Angel Island and looping round to shed speed. Logan shrugged. All flying types will deploy as we do so and cover the rest of us. We don't know what the Sentinels will do, so try to keep away from them if you can. Hate to say this, but if only Squirrel Girl was there. Roberto froze. Logan, why don't we have a door in the plane? Logan blinked, then facepalmed. Arg. If we'd put one in the Javelin, it could have rushed to the island and we could have simply stepped through from the Hall of Doors. I caught that and agree. Cyclops said through the COMM. We'll install one as soon as we get a couple of new doors. Better just do it for the Blackbird, Slim. Logan sighed. There's a range limit and the Javelin goes FTL, remember? We'll just have the door pod stored near it. Good thought though. Yeah. Roberto sighed. If only I'd had it sooner. You did have it. Cyclops said. That's what's important. Hey, is Peter over there? No. Cyclops sighed. I thought you had heard, he went with Clark on that mission of theirs. Oh. Roberto sighed. Damn, would be good to have had him along. Mycenae's Chell, I would have the one who can lift that bridge as one of my horsemen. Magneto, my lord. Sinister asked and Apocalypse nodded even as his gaze remained fixed on the descending bridge. I will begin planning ways to secure him. Good. Apocalypse said, then he frowned slightly. Those steel golems could be a problem if they exist in large enough numbers. I have a source in operation, Zero Tolerance. Sinister commented. I have had him slightly change the programming of the Sentinels, giving you an override in order to command their obedience. Apocalypse's lips moved in a smirk as he watched the bridge finish settling. Excellent, Mycenae's Chell. Excellent. Chapter 18, Quest. Nice jet. Clark allowed as he sat down beside Tony Stark. The multi-billionaire grinned at him. You like? I was inspired by your Javelin, I considered calling it an assegai, but the number of bad puns that it would cause. I eventually settled on Harpoon since this thing is way better armed than yours. That and it's bigger. Clark nodded as he glanced round. The forward cabin, located just behind the cockpit, boasted artificial diamond windows stretching almost from the floor to the deck head. The cabin itself was reminiscent of a 5-star hotel room in the furnishings. A Delta Wing space plane powered by arc reactors, thus removing the need for fuel tanks. Clark marveled. How did you get it to Asgard, anyway? I got Heimdall to help me create a dimensional hyperdrive. Tony smirked. This thing can go to all 9 of the realms. With the FTL drive I traded for from the Justice League, this baby can go anywhere. You've been trading with the Justice League. Clark repeated. Huh, that didn't actually occur to me. What did you trade them? Repulsor technology, way more efficient than what they had. Tony shrugged. I'm keeping the arc reactors to myself. Stark. Thor shouted as he strode into the room. We have a place to start, let us depart. Sure thing. Tony said, pausing to gulp down his drink and throw the glass into the air, allowing Jarvis to use the ceiling-mounted tractor repulsor array to catch it and whisk it away. Everyone aboard. We are. Sam Wilson said as he followed Thor through with CIRL hot behind him. You know, it's scary how much power we have aboard at the moment. I know. Clark agreed as Tony and Thor vanished into the cockpit, with Thor pushed out a moment later. What did you do this time? I know not what thou doth speak of. Thor grumped as he exited the room, leaving 3 highly amused people behind him. Falcon. Get your feathered butt in here. I need a pilot. Sam laughed as he vanished into the cockpit, leaving CIRL grinning as Clark shook his head. So. Clark said after a long moment. How are Shield and Sword treating you? It's interesting. CIRL admitted. Although, I seem to have gained the nickname Karate. Clark blinked, then shook his head. How? Sam's fault. CIRL laughed. We were in a hostage situation and he quoted from a silly cartoon as he used those hollow wings of his to block the bullets being aimed at the hostages. His actual words were, your bullets cannot harm me for my wings are like a shield of steel. Clark finished with a laugh. Some of Generation X used that cartoon to tease Angel. CIRL giggled, then turned as Mystique entered. Hey, hubby. She smiled as Clark enfolded her in a hug. Sheesh, you too. CIRL sighed. Get a room. Mon-El. Doreen Green squealed and the startled Kryptonian found himself with an armful of excitable superheroine. Squirrel girl. Mon replied as politely as possible while mentally sweating buckets. The one who terrified Kall was hugging him. Doreen, can you please let go of Lar? Captain Britain asked, using his pint of beer to hide his grin. Lar? Why did he call you that? Doreen asked with a slight frown. Aren't you Mon-El? I am, and Lar Grand. Mon-El replied stiffly. I don't really remember much of the night I got my new name, although apparently if you mix alcohol with cinnamon, it does affect us Kryptonians. How did we find that out, Brian? I don't really remember. Cocktails. Brian shrugged, letting his grin show. And no, I don't really remember much of that night afterwards, only waking up the next day dressed in drag. Doreen started to giggle as Mon-El sighed. At least you had proper clothes. All I had was a quarter of a bedsheet and a policeman's helmet. We never did track down my original outfit. Doreen doubled up with laughter, only Mon-El's arm kept her from landing on the ground. As Mon-El looked pleadingly at Captain Britain for help, the plane shifted underfoot and suddenly Doreen was at the window, leaving Mon-El to stare at his empty arms in shock. Hey! We're taking off. She squealed as Asgard dropped away beneath them. Yay! Mon-El stared at her, then slowly sidled over to Brian. Did she teleport? No, she just scooted really quick. Brian responded, taking another sip. Crisp. Mon-El stared at the proffered bag. Aren't those chips? English crisps are American chips, while English chips are American fries. Brian explained. I guess that since you were taught by a Yank, you didn't quite get the differences between the two languages. When we get back, I'll have to run you through the differing slang. Goodness knows what you'd think of someone asking to bum a fag. Mon-El stared at him in horrified shock. Captain. A new voice said and Brian nodded in greeting. Captain. Steve. Doreen squealed as she seemed to blur across the room, glomping Captain America hard enough that he staggered into the wall. Is it true? Are you going to propose to Kara? What? Supergirl asked in shock from the doorway and Steve sighed as he disentangled himself from Squirrel Girl. Yes, now that I have had the ring resized for her. I had hoped to surprise her. Oops. Doreen whispered, looking somewhat embarrassed. Well, that's it for now. Tony sighed as he leaned back in the almost sinfully luxurious pilot's chair, his eyes glancing between the touchscreens and projected holograms that had replaced the traditional array of instruments in a plane. Jarvis, autopilot is yours. Very good, sir. Jarvis' voice replied. Yep, all looking good. Sam confirmed as he tapped one of the readouts, then nodded in satisfaction. This is one hell of a plane. Energy shields, weapons turrets, advanced sensors, cloaking device, repulsor engines, you really went all out on this. Thanks. Tony smirked, then he glanced at the closed door. Just between you and me, I needed to build something awesome since Clark's Javelin and the almost completed shield helicarriers were starting to make my old tech look outdated. Yeah. Sam nodded. Have you seen the new helicarriers? I swear, they're like flying battleships. Yup. Tony nodded. Not sure why the council wanted them given how well the original performs, but hey, new toys. Or at least, new toys in a few months or so. So, where exactly are we headed? It's a piece of folded space containing a couple of hundred planets. Tony said, calling up the schematics on one of the holo screens. It's known to the locals as Akiran and is ruled over by our adversary, Thanos, the Mad Titan, from his throne world Tartarus. Sounds pleasant. Sam noted sarcastically. He has his own army, the Chitauri. Apparently they're a militaristic offshoot of the Skrulls, a group who went for a cybernetically augmented hive mind approach millennia ago. No word on how they ended up working for Thanos, though. Sound pleasant. Sam agreed wryly, then he paused. Hey, weren't they the ones that Loki commanded in that battle? They were, which indicates that Thanos was behind it. Steve said from behind them. Only this time, we have Kryptonians available and ready to aid. Yeah, Clark arrived just after the portal was destroyed. Tony reminisced. By the time he got the news at the rescue site, it was pretty much all over. Shame, he could have taken down those Leviathans by himself. Steve sighed. Anything from the info packet Odin gave us. Only a few extra details. Tony shrugged. The location of Tartarus, the position of Thanos' throne and a map of the star system. Did you know Thanos uses floating islands above a hyperspatial portal generator as his primary throne? He has his army assemble around him and then they drop down through the portal to where he wants. Huh, I wonder how much damage that nuke did. Probably all repaired by now. Steve shrugged. Those Chitauri were tough, let's hope that he hasn't managed to breed more to replace them yet. The ether. Malekith gasped as Thanos strode through the portal, a shifting black and red gem cloud in his hands. Thanos smirked, then frowned in concentration and the constantly moving cloud compressed into a rounded gem of shifting yellow hues before Thanos placed it into one of the previously empty settings on his gauntlet. 3 of the 6. Thanos gloated, clenching his fist as he admired the gems, the former tesseract nestled at the base of his thumb, the green centered on the back of his hand and the yellow gem at the base of his first finger. The Grand Master will fall before me next and his gem will be mine. It shall be as you command, my lord and emperor. A voice rasped and Malekith turned to glare at the cloaked figure known as the Other, the leader of the Chitauri hive mind. How goes the rebuilding of your forces, my general? Better than expected, Lord Thanos. Malekith replied, staring at the gauntlet and the limitless power it represented. The Chitauri have proven most capable of manning the weapons systems and make adequate troopers, although they are not able to pilot the craft as well as those of my race. More pilots are being trained even as we speak to man the ships under construction. Thanos turned as a formation of the blade-like starships raced past before they rippled into invisibility. Excellent, my general. Your forces will see combat soon and those who survive their assaults shall flee merely from their names. Yes, Lord Thanos. Malekith said with a deep bow. The laughter of the Med Titan echoed across the plain. The alarm sounded in the cockpit and a moment later, Tony Stark rushed in, clad in his latest armor. Flinging himself into the pilot's seat, he synchronized his armor with the systems of the plane. We almost there? Sam asked as he dropped into the co-pilot's seat and Tony nodded. We passed through the spatial fold a little while ago and will be emerging from FTL outside the Tartarus system, going to stealth mode as we do so. Sam nodded as he scanned the data on the screens, then he tapped a button to tie his headset into the jet's systems. This is the Falcon to all heroes. If you aren't suited up, do so now as we are approaching emergence. All who are not space capable, make sure that you are wearing a nanosuit device, better prepared than dead since I don't want to haul your carcasses back to Earth. Falcon out. You'd make a wonderful flight attendant. Tony snarked as his eyes darted across the screens. Hey! Sam protested, turning to glare at Tony, only to find that he'd snapped his faceplate closed. Hate it when you do that. He grumbled, turning back to the display. Beneath his helmet, Tony smirked at Sam's grumbling. I heard the alert. A new voice said and Tony waved. Hey, Brian. You may want to take a seat. Captain Britain nodded and dropped into one of the remaining 2 chairs, glancing at the control screens. You don't seem to have an armband. Brian noted and Sam shrugged. I had my gear upgraded by Superman, my nano-suits integrated into my flight harness. Ah, I had wondered. Brian admitted as the light tube outside seemed to fragment and shatter into a starfield. We're sublight now, all stealth systems activated. Tony said. Jarvis, how are the scans going? Passive and optical scanners are fully active, sir. Preliminary scans now ready for perusal. A schematic of a solar system filled the largest screen in front of Brian, then one of the planets started flashing. Destination located, sir. Excellent, Jarvis. Tony replied, his fingers seeming to twitch across empty air as he used the feedback of his armor to manipulate the plane's controls. I have also placed the results on the main screen of the deployment bay, sir. Jarvis added. Tony nodded, then took a closer look at the system schematic. There, that's his throne world. The one with the giant moon around it. Brian, you've gone pale. What is it? Captain Britain swallowed twice, then spoke, his eyes fixed on the screen. I always thought that I'd enjoy having the chance to say this, but that's no moon. Sam and Tony turned to stare at him, then they both spun back to examine the display, showing the satellite around the throne world. Bloody hell. Sam finally managed. Please tell me it doesn't have a super laser. Tony raised his faceplate and leaned closer to the screen before sighing. I hope the stealth systems are good enough, I'd hate for us to be detected by that thing. You and me both. Sam muttered. You and me both. Chapter 19, Battle. The fragments of the 6th Sentinel vanished into the waves as the bridge finished settling, then Magneto stepped forwards, his eyes fixed on the mixed military and security personnel running to key positions. Homo sapiens and their guns. He sneered as he reached out, then he frowned. They're learning. They have no metal on them. The defenders waited, guns at the ready, and Magneto shrugged. We have come this far, let us go the rest of the way. Attack. With a roar, the horde of mutants surged forwards and Magneto thrust out one arm, stopping Galatea in her tracks. No, only the pawns attack first. I thought I was one. Galatea growled and Magneto shook his head. No. You are my weapon, but your powers make you more than a pawn. Wait for now. Even as he spoke, a dozen more sentinels appeared and he sighed. There are your targets, Galatea. Destroy those sentinels. Galatea blurred forwards, gaining altitude even as the first guns fired. Those do not sound like regular guns. Magneto frowned, then he spread his fingers. Behind him, the empty coaches that had blocked the bridge slid to the sides of the road. Quill waited impatiently as the quartet of mutants whose powers gave them control over steel and concrete melded the end of the bridge to the road. After a moment, one of them waved and Quill turned to the driver. Let's go. With a grin, the driver accelerated up the newly formed ramp and Quill glanced behind him, seeing the first of the other coaches moving to follow his coach onto the bridge. Galatea tore into the giant robots, firing beams of cutting heat from her eyes as she ripped them to shreds, taking out her rage against the one who controlled her on the metallic war machines. Spotting one that looked more human-like, she swooped down on it, ripping its head off and ignoring the plastic darts that ricocheted off her skin. Hurling the wreckage at a second sentinel, she growled as a missile exploded, temporarily deafening her. Right. She growled. No more Miss Nice Clone. Although significantly outnumbered, the guards had several notable advantages. They were backed up by a military platoon. Although this almost doubled their numbers to 51 and they were facing over 1,000 adversaries, their reinforcements were highly professional and refused to panic, their steadfastness supporting the willingness of the guards to hold the line. Their attackers were running uphill towards them. This gave them a better range and meant that most of the attackers were beginning to tire by the time they reached the outer fence. The attackers were unused to actually fighting together. This meant that rather than an army of mutants, the guards merely faced a mob. Although still a challenge, it was far less than a true army would have been. And the attackers were relying on their powers. Many had trained themselves, seeking ways to maximize their abilities, but none of them had considered what they would do if their powers failed them, or were removed. The first volley was targeted at those who were obviously an immediate threat, those holding balls of energy or who were throwing projectiles. The second took down many of those in the front rank of the attacking mob, an action that did not go unnoticed. They've weaponized it. Magneto growled. Arclight, can you take out those guns? Not without touching one first. Arclight admitted, then she blinked as Pietro blurred to a halt in front of her, a rifle in his arms and two more landing at his feet. Got one. He smirked as the sounds of combat in the background increased. Arclight took the rifle and an instant later, it suddenly shattered. Got it. She smirked. Magneto smiled as she took a step forwards, energy pooling in her outstretched cupped hands, then she snapped her arms forwards, slamming her palms together to unleash a wave of crackling energy that slashed across the battlefield, passing through the combatants without doing more than distracting them, but causing the rifles to crack and splinter into uselessness. With their primary weapons removed, the tide of battle quickly turned. Good work, kid. She finished in confusion, looking round for the teen who had given her the gun. You get used to Quicksilver's impatience. Magneto said, catching her attention. You must remember, his heartbeat at rest is 20 beats a second, all of us are in slow motion to him. Arclight nodded, then her eyes widened as she saw a silver blur weaving through the guards. Pietro raced through the mob, laughing as he struck out, sending the guards and soldiers flying. Slowing slightly, he pushed at a handgun, only for it to fire, sending a trio of plastic darts into the mob, depowering 3 of the attackers. Oops. Pietro winced as 2 of the affected started panicking while the third stared at his no longer scaled hands before fainting. Lashing out, he took down the soldier, then looked round. It's clear. He shouted. Let's move. The roar of the mob rose and he turned to face the building in which the so-called cure was being made, then a beam of red light slashed across the ground before him as a plane roared past. Jerking his head up, Pietro stared as the javelin finished its roll even as it decelerated at a rate that no plane should have been capable of. Approaching Angel Island. Scott announced. Scanners indicate that the last soldiers are being overwhelmed, everyone hang on. Alex gave his brother a confused look which turned to shock as Scott spun the javelin upside down. What are you doing? He yelped even as screams and shouts echoed from the main compartment. Scott spared him a quick grin, then raised one hand to his visor. Scoot. Even as Alex shouted in protest, Scott activated his visor, sending a beam of ruby light straight into the cockpit's windscreen. And straight through without causing any damage to it at all. How? Alex gasped as Scott pulled the javelin out of its inverted flight and reversed the thrust of the engines at the same time. Clark installed special cockpit windows so that I could fire through them. Scott shrugged as he settled the plane on the helipad of the building. All right, we're down. Everyone out and ready. Alex glared at his brother as the ramp hissed down and the passengers began to debark at a run. I'll remember this, you know. Scott laughed as he finished powering down the javelin and unbuckled himself. Come on, let's not miss this. Alex sighed as he followed his brother. Why did I leave Australia? Pietro picked himself up and shook his head. What the hell was THAWA? A second plane flew past barely 5 meters above the ground, swinging round to land in front of the research building. Even as it landed, a ramp extended from the black aircraft and people started to pile out. Pietro paled as the leading newcomer spotted him. Oh hell! He yelped as he ducked a purple blast. I'm so outta here. Coward! Wanda screamed as her brother vanished in a blur. Concentrate! McCoy snapped as he ran past on all fours. Hold the line. The scene was briefly illuminated by a red blast and Hank grinned as the beam slammed into the ground in front of the mob, the concussion wave sending a dozen attackers flying. "There's too many of them." Jubilee gasped as she raised her shades to see the mob better, then Lance stepped past her, cracking his knuckles. "Oh, they won't get past us, sweet cheeks. Let me show you how the Brotherhood does things." As the attackers started to work themselves up into a charge, Lance inhaled deeply, then stretched his hands out. "Let's shake things up," he shouted, stamping on the ground and sending a wave through the earth, sending the entire front rank of the mob sprawling. "Avalanche!" Magneto snarled. "It would seem that the Brotherhood has truly chosen to betray me." Arclight glanced at him, then she blinked as the first coach trundled past with Quill hanging out of the door. "Ataeok! Fu rewards! Now for guts and glory!" Magneto half-turned, a disbelieving expression on his face, and Arclight shrugged. "He sometimes gets carried away." Magneto continued to stare at her. Quill leapt out of the now-stopped coach and started to push his way forwards, only to stumble as the ground rippled underneath him. "Damn it, Richter!" he shouted. "Be careful how you use your power." "Hey, it ain't me. It's common from them." The gray-haired man snarled as he strode forwards. "They've got a ground shaker of their own. Can you block him?" "Never done it before, but, yeah. I'll need protecting, though, gonna have to concentrate for this." Quill nodded and motioned for several people to protect Quake, then he finished pushing through to the front. Looking round, he saw that only a dozen or so were blocking them. "Omegas lead the way!" he shouted, his cry quickly picked up by the other Omegas. "Chaarj! Shit!" Lance swore in a flat tone of voice. "There's another seismic type out there, he's cancelling my powers. Either one of us goes down, the other gets free rein on shaking things up. Ain't gonna be able to do much while I'm matching him. Sorry. Just move to back and stay ready." Colossus rumbled as he checked the small device on his belt was still working. "Form lines, strong in front." Jubilee stepped back, then blinked as a small boy stepped past her to stand next to Colossus. The metal man looked down in concern. "Chris, you ready for this?" Chris nodded, then smiled as Laura slid into position beside him, extending his claws. "Superboy and Kunoichi, ready?" Colossus nodded, then looked at the charging mutants while above them, lightning flashed out, knocking one of the flying mutants from the sky. "All others, hold line, front row, attack." Warren Worthington III swooped down, his gloves glowing with the stunning field emitted from the circuitry integrated into them by Lexington. His target never saw him coming and paid the price as Angel slammed into him, the field knocking him out almost instantly. As he pulled up, a beam of red passed just below him and he heard it impact on someone behind him. Pausing only to give a nod of thanks to Cyclops for intercepting whoever it was who had been about to attack him, Angel beat his wings to gain more height, looking round to find another target. Chris slammed into the largest of the mutants before him, trusting in his Kryptonian heritage to protect him. The 9-foot-tall woman was knocked off her feet and sent flying backwards, knocking over at least another dozen mutants like Skittles, then someone grabbed his arm. "Time for you to get some sleep, brat." The man snarled as his hand glowed green and Chris grinned at the proof that, like his father, he was also immune to mutant powers. "You get some sleep," he countered, and the man's eyes widened just before Chris delivered an uppercut that somersaulted the man into the crowd. A roar attracted his attention and he whistled at the sight of Hank McCoy balancing on one hand, spinning as he used his other hand and both feet to throw a trio of mutants back. "Go, teach," he whispered in awe. "Whoa!" Bobby Drake whistled as he watched the young Kryptonian forge a path through the attacking crowd. "Remind me to not tease him about having an older girlfriend. Less talk, more action." Tabitha snarled as she hurled a spray of explosive spheres at a small group that had managed to slip between the first line of defense. Bobby blushed slightly as he covered the slope before them in ice, causing the attacking mutants to slide back into the running battle, cursing as they did so. "Trace Bone Travail." Gambit complimented him and Bobby grinned at the newest teacher. "Hey, what can I say? I'm cool. C8 unblogged terrible." Gambit groaned as he unleashed a spray of exploding cards. Logan. Creed. The two stared at each other for a long moment, then Creed tilted his head slightly. Not attacking yet? What happened? Short stuff. We fought together before, but something happened. Logan growled. I want answers, Creed. How long did we fight alongside each other, brother? Creed's eyes widened in shock. You, remember? How? DNA don't lie. Logan snarled. You gonna talk, bub, or am I gonna have to drag your worthless carcass back to the Institute for answers? Despite the rampaging battle around them, it almost seemed silent, then Sabretooth sighed. Not today, little brother. I got a job to do. Grab that so-called cure so that Magneto can reverse it and turn everyone into mutants like us. Like he tried to do with the Gem of Sidorak. Logan countered. You remember that, right? He almost wiped out all humans, normals, and mutants. It's different this time. Creed growled, dropping into a combat-ready stance. Sorry, but you ain't going to stop us. That's what you think. Logan replied, clenching his fists. Snicked. Chapter 20, Gauntlet. Tony slumped back in his seat as Sam finished the power-down process. Damn, that was tense. He muttered and Captain Britain nodded. There were a couple of iffy moments, yes. You Brits and your damned understatement. Tony snorted, watching as another flight of spacecraft ripped into visibility near the horizon. Those are really odd ships. Dark elves. Thor ground out from the door. I have never seen them in person before today, but I have studied many records of them from my father's battles. What sort of weapons do they mount? Almost none, although their wing is as sharp as any blade. Thor said. Many cultures place a great premium on fighting as warriors. You humans are one of the few that has learned to fight as soldiers instead. Who are the others? Sam asked, his curiosity roused. Of the existing races, the Shi'ar lead the way. The Kree and the Skrull are also on that path, as were the Kryptonians before they chose to retreat from the violence around them, fortifying themselves behind a shield that surrounded their entire solar system. A good explanation and one that my uncle wouldn't be able to deny. A new voice said and everyone looked round to see Lorzed standing in the doorway behind Thor. So, we're secure here. Tony said as he rose from his seat. I think we should head to the main bay for the briefing. This is going to be harder than we expected. Tony said as a hollow screen projected a map behind him. We are here and our target is here. Those of you with HUDs will see a new icon, a golden gauntlet in a circle. That icon shows the direction that Thanos is in. Your HUD is linked the sensors tuned to the energy emissions of the Infinity Gauntlet. Thor. Even without the gauntlet, Thanos is not one to underestimate. Thor said. He is strong, at least on a level with an empowered Kryptonian and very probably stronger. According to my father, he is incredibly resistant to magic and is very intelligent. Compared to him, the top-ranking member of your Mensa would be a small naive child. He has lived millennia and has learned many ways of fighting. If he has a weak point, it is his ego. On several occasions, he has simply let an attack strike him and relied on his near invulnerability to protect him, thus proving to his enemies that similar attacks are futile. With the Infinity Gauntlet, even an incomplete version, his threat level goes up from Omega to Ragnarok. Anything less than an all-out attack will do nothing to him. Attempting to hold back, even slightly, will lead to him simply overpowering you. It is possible that he may even rival the Living Tribunal. Thor added, earning confused looks from all but a few of the audience. None as powerful as he have ever wielded the gauntlet before. There are several ways to reach Thanos. Steve said as he stepped forwards to take over the presentation. The Kryptonians and other flying types will fly through this area here. What about the valleys? Someone called and Steve shook his head. They'll almost certainly be booby-trapped. No, the best way is through the military base at low level, destroying as many defense emplacements as possible. The Kryptonians will lead the way, followed by the other flying types who will also try to do as much damage as possible. The main ground force will follow while those with enhanced speed and agility will split into pairs or trios and spread out to try and penetrate the outer defenses while the primary attack acts as a distraction for them. By using multiple axes of attack, the Kaituri and Dark Elves should find it harder to mount an effective counter-strike. I call Spider-Man. Doreen chirped, causing everyone to stare at her. What? He's almost as agile as I am. Almost. Peter repeated in shock. Clark looked round at the people standing with him. Kara Zor-El smiled at him while beside her, Karsta War-El stood, the unhappiness at what she was being asked to do evident on her face. Thuraya Kavar and her cousin Lorzad seemed almost eager to go while Mon-El stood almost immobile, his face showing no real emotion. Around them were the other flyers. Captain Britain, energy pooling round his fists. Sunfire, a grin of eagerness on his face. Thor, his hammer dangling from one wrist, and several others that he wished he knew as more than faces. People, it is time. Clark stated. All of us Kryptonians are fully charged, so we don't hold back. Blast anything that looks military. Let's move. Rising from the ground, Clark accelerated rapidly. An instant later, Thor appeared by his side, hammer extended. This will be a great battle. Thor shouted, and Clark shook his head. There is no such thing as a great battle. He countered. It is good that war is so terrible, otherwise we might learn to love it. Thor furrowed his brow in thought as the massed flyers rose above the ridge, coming into view of the teeming base. Thanos strode out of the portal and raised his gauntlet, showing all 6 stones mounted in it. At last, the Infinity Gauntlet is mine. He roared, then he frowned as explosions started to erupt amongst the training grounds of his Chitauri forces. Closing his eyes in concentration, he remained motionless for a moment, then he growled. We are under attack. I need but a short while to become one with the power of the gauntlet. Go, my army, destroy the attackers. The Chitauri and the Dark Elves scrambled to their vehicles and weapons even as the spaceships already in the air spun and raced towards the intruders. Incoming starships. Clark spun round, then accelerated, Thor's description of them racing through his mind. Looping wide, he slammed straight through the side of one of them, catching a glimpse of a humanoid wearing a pale, white mask before erupting out of the other side in a hail of shrapnel and debris. Behind him, the bisected starship began its tumble towards the ground, and Clark lined up on the next blade ship even as another also suffered from a Kryptonian impact. As he smashed through the craft, his eyes widened at the sight of another blade ship being grabbed out of the air. Rhodey ducked as a blast of lightning crackled past over his right shoulder, slamming into a platoon of Chitauri who had sprung out of nowhere. Damn it, lightning, I had them. Keep telling yourself that, old man. The black-skinned superhero laughed as he stepped up beside the armored superhero and added his electrical powers to the carnage that War Machine was dealing out. These things were Zerg rushing you. What rushing? Damn it, War Machine, try to keep up with popular culture. Miguel Santos sighed as War Machine finished scrambling out of the crater caused by his unplanned landing. A moment later, a Dark Elf blade ship slammed into the ground, its top grasped by a huge pair of hands that were wielding it like a giant sword. Nice one, giant man. Miguel cheered, and the looming titan grinned before sweeping his improvised sword across the ground, sending the enemies flying. Recruiting him was a good move. Rhodey mused as he unleashed another barrage of repulsor-fired metal. Despite the therapy bills. Hey, he's been calmer since going into therapy. Miguel argued. I think it's money well spent. War Machine shrugged and turned to the next attacking group of Chitauri. I think we need one of those ships. Miguel added. We can use the hull to kludge together a proper giant sword for him. How would he carry it when he isn't huge? War Machine countered, and Miguel paused. Pim particle generator in the hilt? I dunno. A Chitauri wailed in shock as a long, blue-clad arm plucked him out of his formation and catapulted him into the path of another group of Chitauri warriors. His squad mates opened fire, only for the plasma bursts to explode against an invisible barrier, then a gravelly voice roared its war cry. It's clobberin' time. An instant later the formation collapsed as what seemed to be an orange avalanche slammed into them, sending them into high arc trajectories. Wahoo! Spider-Man shook his head as he used his webbing to swing round one of the weapon emplacement towers before firing a couple of webbing balls at the gunners. With the weapon thus temporarily disabled, he shot another web line. only to find himself being jerked through the air as the tower crumpled to the ground. Landing in a fluid roll that let him rise to his feet, he glared at Squirrel Girl, mentally cursing the fact that Forge hadn't fully finished the mask improvements that he had asked for, and this he had to rely on body language rather than eye mask shape. What? Squirrel Girl shrugged as she dropped the support strut that she had wrenched out of the tower, thus causing its collapse. Let's just keep moving. Spider-Man finally managed. Uff. Clark picked himself up and triggered his COMM. All flyers, watch out for the leading edges of those starships. Damned things are harder than we are. A chorus of confirmations answered him, and Clark nodded before absently backhanding away a dark elf that had tried to stab him in his side. Then he pursed his lips and blew away a grenade that had been thrown at him. The result caused his eyes to widen and he triggered his comm again. Everyone, watch for the grenades. They're singularity generators that'll suck you in. If you see a grenade, get away from it. Clark crouched, then launched himself into the air. An instant afterwards, 3 of the grenades landed where he had just been and activated. On a ridge above the raging battle, 3 dark elves pulled red glowing fist-sized crystals out of their belt pouches. Holding them in their hands, they clenched their fists, shattering the crystals and driving the shards into the palms of their hands. Almost in unison, they roared with pain and rage as their bodies seemed to ignite from the inside, growing larger and stronger. Then they leapt forwards, their bestial howling echoing as their burning forms solidified into monstrous forms adorned with bony spikes. Fall back. It's the cursed. Sif shouted as one of the monsters landed in front of her, then it was pulverized by a descending green fist. Puny cursed. Sif stared, jaw dropped in shock as the Hulk proceeded to punch straight through the second of the cursed, then ripped the third one in half. Wow. Sif breathed in amazement. He's strong. Hulk, strongest one there is. Hulk roared as he picked up a screeching Chitauri and hurled it like a skipping stone through an entire platoon, sending them flying and earning a nod of gratitude from Captain America. Sif shook herself, then spun her sword before charging back into battle. That thing just destroyed 3 of the cursed like they were mere humans. Malekith gasped as he stared into the scrying screen. It is of no concern. The other rasped. Only a few more moments and our Lord and Master will be one with the gauntlet. All we need is time and we will provide it, no matter the cost. Malekith nodded slowly, then activated his communicator. All who carry the curse of darkness who are not directly engaged in combat but are within attacking range, become the cursed and strike down our enemies. He snarled. The other smirked appreciatively as on the scrying screen, the plumes of smoke that marked the transformations began appearing all across the battlefield. A great power. And one that costs me a soldier each time it is used. Malekith growled. Unlike the Chitauri, we elves breed slowly. It will take millennia to fully recover from today's battle. You will have those millennia once our master finishes claiming his power. The other countered. Thanos laughed triumphantly as he felt the power stabilize within him, permeating every portion of his body, enhancing every cell. At last, the power of the Infinity Gauntlet is mine. He roared, his voice echoing across the battlefield. Oh, fuck. Tony hissed. It would seem that this may be my last battle. The Silver Samurai sighed as he absent-mindedly decapitated a trio of Chitauri with a single strike. At least I shall die with honor. By Odin's beard, this is not good. Thor growled. Truly. Volstagg agreed. This is bad, right? Samuel asked and Rhodey nodded. I doubt that this is a sign that we currently have the tactical advantage. Reed stated. I say, this does not look good. Captain Britain commented as he blasted 2 of the cursed. You think? Mon-El snorted as he punched out another one. Was that the bad man? Come on. We are in trouble. Clark stated. All flying types, head for target now. Even as he finished his command, a massive blast of power slammed him out of the air. Pulling himself out of the resulting crater, he looked round at the cracked and shattered ground and the skies now clear of all flying things, ships, or heroes. What just happened? Check the description for the links to the author.